My Dolly's eyes. Susie was over the moon when she received Dolly for her 7th birthday.
Thank you.
Dolly had sparkling blue button eyes, rosy red cheeks, and golden curls that bounced when she moved. Susie loved to play tea party and dress up with Dolly. She would spend hours talking and singing to her new best friend. A few weeks later, strange things started happening around the house. Susie's mother was vacuuming when she tripped on the rug and broke her ankle. Susie's father cut his hand badly while preparing dinner one night. The neighbor's cat went missing. Susie started to notice Dolly's eyes following her wherever she went, and the doll's happy smile seemed to turn wicked when no one else was looking. Susie tried telling her parents about Dolly, but they dismissed her concerns as imagination. That night, as Susie tucked Dolly into bed, she swore she saw a flash of red in the doll's eyes. Susie tossed and turned, images of Dolly crawling across the floor with a knife in her hands, filling her mind. The next morning, Susie's mother had a terrible headache. As Susie entered the kitchen for breakfast, she noticed her mother accidentally grabbed rat poison instead of headache powder. Susie lunged and knocked the glass from her hands just in time. Her mother didn't understand how she could have made such a mistake. The bottles looked nothing alike. Susie knew exactly who was behind it. That night, Susie waited until the house was dark and quiet. She tiptoed into her room and peered into Dolly's glass case. A chill went down Susie's spine as she looked straight into Dolly's red, glowing eyes. In her hands, Dolly clutched a sharp silver knife. Heart pounding, Susie grabbed Dolly and ran to the backyard. She tossed the doll into the blazing fire pit. Dolly seemed to shriek as the flames engulfed her porcelain body. Susie watched tensely until the last of Dolly was gone. Back inside, Susie tucked herself into bed, relieved to finally be rid of the evil doll. As her eyes grew heavy, she imagined she heard faint giggling. Brushing it off as the wind, Susie drifted to sleep. Down the hall, the charred remains of Dolly sat atop the dresser, eyes ablaze and knife in hand. A wicked grin spread across her burnt face as she slid off the dresser and crept towards Susie's room. For what burned once could never truly die, and Dolly would make sure Susie learned that lesson well. Susie's eyes flew open. The smell of smoke still clung to the air. Heart pounding, she peered around her dark bedroom. Nothing seemed amiss, but she couldn't shake the feeling she was being watched. Sliding out of bed, Susie tiptoed down the hall. A floorboard creaked under her foot. She froze, listening intently. Only the sound of her father's snores filled the silence. Gripping her nightlight tightly, Susie continued on. She stopped outside her parents' room. The smell of burnt plastic lingered in the air. With a deep breath, Susie pushed open the door. Moonlight spilled across the room, illuminating the horror before her. Perched atop her mother's chest of drawers sat the charred remains of Dolly, eyes glowing red, silver knife clutched in her burnt-up hand. Susie stifled a scream. How could this be? She had destroyed Dolly hours ago. Heart hammering against her chest, Susie noticed her mother's sleeping form. Next to her lay Susie's father, unnaturally still. Creeping closer, Susie choked back a sob. The shiny silver blade of the knife protruded from her father's chest. Dark blood spread across the blankets. Tears streamed down Susie's face at the sight of her beloved father lying lifeless before her. A floorboard creaked behind her. Whirling around, Susie came face to face with Dolly. Her porcelain face was blackened and cracked, but her eyes glowed like hot coals. With unnatural speed, Dolly lunged forward, knife glinting in the moonlight. Susie turned and fled down the hall, the burnt-up doll close at her heels. Racing into the kitchen, Susie grabbed a meat cleaver from the counter. As Dolly appeared in the doorway, Susie swung with all her might. The sharp blade connected with Dolly's burnt body, slicing her in two. Dolly fell to the floor in pieces, but to Susie's horror, the doll began dragging itself across the floor towards her, eyes ablaze. Backing away in terror, Susie suddenly remembered the blowtorch in the garage. If fire destroyed Dolly once before, it could do it again. Susie raced to the garage and fired up the blowtorch. Wheeling around, she came face to face with Dolly's hideous, burnt-up head peering through the doorway. Gripping the blowtorch with trembling hands, Susie unleashed the flames. Dolly's head went up in a burst of fire, her shrill wails piercing the night. Susie did not stop until every last ember was extinguished. Breathing hard, she sank to the garage floor, the deadly silence enveloping her. It was finally over. Yet as exhaustion overtook her, she imagined faint giggling in the distance. Bolting upright, Susie saw two glowing eyes peering through the garage window. Gripping the blowtorch tight, Susie steeled herself. Evil did not die so easily after all. Susie stood frozen, staring at the glowing red eyes peering through the garage window. She clutched the blowtorch tightly, though her hands trembled. The eyes blinked and then disappeared into the darkness. Had she imagined them? No, evil lurked out there, determined to torment her. Susie knew she couldn't hide here all night. Gripping the blowtorch, she crept to the garage door and peered outside. The moonlight cast an eerie glow across the backyard. The swing set creaked as it swayed lightly in the breeze. Susie's eyes darted around, searching for any sign of movement. Her breath caught in her throat as she noticed shallow holes in the ground leading from the charred remains of the fire pit toward the trees at the back of the yard. Susie realized with dawning horror that Dolly had dragged herself from the fire. Heart pounding, Susie inched across the yard, following the trails left in the dirt. She paused at the edge of the woods, peering into the impenetrable darkness. The sounds of the night forest surrounded her. Somewhere an owl hooted, leaves rustled across the ground, then silence. Susie froze as the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Something was here. She wheezed as icy fingers wrapped around her throat from behind. The blowtorch clattered to the ground as Susie clawed at the skeletal hand. Laughter filled her ears as she was dragged backwards. Thrashing violently, Susie's hand found a rock. She gripped it tight and swung with all her might. It connected with Dolly's burnt-up porcelain face with a sickening crack. The grip on her throat loosened. Susie broke free and snatched up the blowtorch. Spinning around, she came face to face with the demonic doll. Dolly's head hung limply at an odd angle, the fine cracks spreading across her face like spiderwebs. One crimson eye stared out while the other had gone dark. With a shriek of rage, Dolly lunged, her shard-like teeth bared. Susie pulled the trigger on the blowtorch. Fire erupted around Dolly's head. She recoiled, twisted limbs flailing as shrieks of agony filled the night. Susie did not stop until Dolly was nothing more than a melted, charred heap on the ground. Dropping the blowtorch, Susie sank to her knees. It was finally over. She stayed there until dawn peeked over the horizon, keeping a wary eye on the smoldering remains. Only when the first birds began to chirp did Susie finally stumble inside. She had avenged her father and ended Dolly's reign of terror for good. Yet as Susie drifted to sleep, she couldn't escape the feeling that a pair of eyes were still watching her every move, lurking and waiting for their chance to strike once more. Darkness lurks in the most innocent of forms. Not everything is as it first appears. Keep a wary eye on that which seems harmless, for evil and malice can manifest when least expected. Do not dismiss the quiet whispers trying to warn you, lest oblivion find you sleeping. Do not underestimate or ignore signs of darkness or danger, even if they come from an unlikely source. Things like dolls may appear harmless initially, but can harbor sinister intentions if possessed by malevolent forces. It cautions to stay alert and heed warning signs before it's too late. The saying uses vivid imagery to emphasize the need for vigilance against evil hiding in innocent disguises. Please like, share, and subscribe for more creepy tales from the netherworld. Thanks for your support. Until next time, sweet dreams.